Hello and welcome to FACTS webinar, Climate, Loss and Grief, Building Understanding and Resilience. Our guest presenter is Maud Powell. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACTS Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating this session today.
Samantha, I'm hoping to share my slides, and I think maybe you have to stop sharing yours.
We're not quite there yet. Just a second, Maud.
Sorry about that. All right.
Okay, before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Our Fund to Farmer grant applications are now open. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcernstrust.org to learn more about all of our farmer services. I would also like to take a second to introduce my wonderful colleague, Catherine Hoke, who will be in the wings to help out in case of any technical difficulties. Thank you very much, Catherine. At this time, I'm very pleased to introduce our esteemed presenter, Maud Powell. Maud has an MA from Antioch University, Seattle, in Environment and Community Studies, and received her BA from Swarthmore College in Comparative Religion. I should have asked you how to pronounce all these things. Sorry, Maud. She and her husband have owned and operated Wolf Gulch Farm, a small diversified vegetable and seed farm in the Little Applegate Valley, for 10 years. Maud worked for 4 years as project manager for the, I'm not even going to say it. What is it, Maud?
Siskiyou
Sustainable Cooperative, and currently coordinates their community-supported agriculture program. Maud is passionate about reinvigorating rural communities by strengthening local economies and increasing food and fiber production. We are very lucky to have Maud with us today to share her experience and expertise. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you, Maud. Please take it away.
Thanks, Sam. Sorry, obviously I'm chomping at the bit to talk about this topic, so I jumped on you, and I will get my PowerPoint up now. Wonderful. Well, I'm really excited to be here. So honored to be asked to present with you, and hope we'll have some interesting conversations. The bio that Sam read is a little bit outdated. We've actually been farming, my husband and I, for 25 years now. We started farming in actually 96. We started working on some other people's farms, interning, learning how to grow succession vegetables, and then bought our property in 98. And as the bio said, we ended up running a community supported agriculture program for about 18 years and gradually got into more and more seed production. So we grow vegetable and flower seeds on contract with about 6 different seed companies across the country. And you'll hear more about my story because it really does inform how I got into this work. If you'd asked me 10 years ago if I was going to be talking about climate grief and climate emotions, I would have laughed in your face. But then, then things changed. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just engage a little bit. Assuming you believe in climate change or not, I think we're all acknowledging that we see really extreme weather events. Generally, we're seeing like the hottest days on record, the hottest months, the hottest years. So just dropping all the other whys and hows, just thinking about a time that you felt strong emotions, perhaps on your farm, something you were noticing or something that you experienced. And then I wanted to introduce you all to this climate emotions wheel that comes out of the North American Climate Psychology Association. There's actually a lot more feelings. This isn't complete at all, but just take a look and kind of notice, if you think about that one time that you felt strong emotions, what were those emotions? Did they fall in any of these different colored patterns? And then we're actually going to go ahead and do a Slido. I don't know if you all have done this before, but if you do have a phone and you want to go ahead and take a picture of this QR code, and then with your phone, if you haven't done this before, maybe you could ask for help in the support chat if you need help. But generally, you're going to take your phone and take a picture of that. And then what you'll do is that will take you into the Slido link, and you can just write down 3 emotions that you associate. It looks like someone's typing, so someone's going to get in here. But I want to sort of get a sense of like, what is the constellation of climate emotions that you all are feeling? And this is going to be called a word cloud. So thank you to that first person: fear, powerlessness, anxiety. And you'll see that the words will grow if multiple people write the same word. So yeah, a lot of fear. Probably 4 people wrote the fear. So yeah, if you can we'll just take a couple of moments and see, yeah, confusion, stress. Um, so a lot in that kind of fear quadrant, I'm noticing. That's the quadrant I tend to be in the most. Yeah, yeah, a lot of anxiety, definitely. Interesting. It's interesting because I'm not yet seeing any of the positivity or the anger necessarily. I see a lot of this, like some sadness, yeah, uncertainty. So a lot of this fear. Nice. Yep. So anxiety is beating fear currently. We'll see if that continues. So I'll just leave the poll open for another minute or two if anyone looks like someone else is in there. This is just kind of a fun way to engage with you all, to get you to start thinking about your own relationship with climate emotions. Okay. Oh, I'll wait for that one person to enter theirs and then we'll move on. Oh, inspiration. Okay, that's fun to see. Scary. Yeah. Okay, great.
Hey, Maud, if you have a link for the Slido,
Yeah.
would you mind putting that in the chat?
Yeah, so the link is here. It's the slido.com right here down on this left-hand side. So you could enter that anywhere into any browser. And then there's a number here, 1178312. So
Do you write the actual number sign or just
I think just the
1178?
number. Yeah, just put the number in.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and
I didn't know that. Thank you.
yeah, hang on. We'll be using this a couple more times. So why doesn't everyone take a minute to just get in here? Hold on. Okay, great. So going back to that climate emotions, we're going to do that Slido again, because I just wanted to see where folks tend to find themselves, which of the 4 quadrants you most relate to. I already gave mine away. I definitely tend towards that fear quadrant, but I'm curious where everyone else does. So again, you can either just click on the QR code if you just put your phone's camera up there, or else you can type in slido.com and you can connect to the poll that way. Yep. Oh, good. Okay. I don't mean good, but I'm always, there's something energetic and passionate about anger. Yeah, great. All right. I'll just wait another little bit here. Okay, so someone's got positivity in here. Mm-hmm. Great. So I wanted to show you that climate emotions wheel and have you just engage with a little bit, because it really helped support me in my own process, which I'm going to share now. As I mentioned, my husband and I bought this property in 1998. We did community supported agriculture for many years. We did farmers markets. And then we're in the southwest corner of Oregon, and we started in about 2015 to get these really hot, unusually hot, and less than average rainfall every year. So we started to watch as our creeks were drying up. We weren't getting, as much, they weren't filling as much in the summer and then in the winter. And then we were getting this sort of like intermittent creek pattern in the winter. So we started to do everything we possibly could on our farm to save water. So we put everything on drip tape. We started switching over to seed crops. So we were doing everything we could adapt to this higher, drier climate. And we felt like we were pretty resilient. And I was actually studying all about climate resilience at work. I was creating these modules online for people, for all the farmers that I work with at my Oregon State University job. But even so, we just continued to have this hotter, drier weather until in 2021. That was, if you're not familiar, that was when the Northwest experienced this heat dome. So for us, we had 17 days where the high never got below 105, which is really unseasonable for us. And it was a very, very difficult time for me and Tom. We were triaging which crops to keep alive because we couldn't keep all the crops alive. So we were doing some sort of kitchen table analysis of what were our most important crops for our bottom line, for keeping the farm financially viable. We were pumping water from a lower pond up to our upper pond. At one point, we resorted to buying water from Medford, our closest municipality, and having it trucked to our farm. And I'll just never forget hearing the truck rumble up the driveway and just thinking like, wow, we've come to this. Meanwhile, we're having a lot of die off in our forests of our Douglas fir and our ponderosa pine to the beetle bark tree, beetle bark beetle. So we were just continuing to see this in a really precipitous way. And it was during that heat dome that we turned to each other and just decided like, we can't stay here if we want to continue to farm. And that place we'd put 25 years into, we had raised both of our children there. Tom liked to joke that the topsoil on the property was our third child because he'd spent so much time nurturing and building it. So you can imagine it was a terrible moment for us to realize we needed to move if we wanted to keep farming, which we did. And it was that point that I just saw how much stress we were under. And it was really difficult. What I noticed is it was so hard to make a decision. We weren't really on the same page. There were so many feelings coming up, a lot of anger, deep, deep sadness, a lot of fear. You know, that place was home. It felt safe to us. And thinking about giving that up was really terrifying. So just such deep and complex feelings. And I really realized at that point that I needed support. I needed to figure out how to kind of navigate through these intense feelings so that we could continue farming and that we could make decisions. Because it was that classic, like when you're under stress and it's hard to think straight. And I would kind of toggle between feeling really sad and despair. And so it was a very confusing time. So I did some internet digging. This is our farm. These are our kids, and this is the pond in better days, and then the pond during that heat dome. So yeah, we really had no water left. And so once I started looking online, I found that there were names for these things. There was climate stress, which is simply just stress caused by climate change. It can manifest in lots of different ways, including short bouts of positive stretch to give us energy for tasks ahead, but it can also be ongoing, and that can cause lots of different physical and mental health impacts. And then I also learned about climate grief, which is a natural response to loss or anticipated loss or changes to the environment. And I really, in that definition, I like to underscore the word natural because, as with all grief, climate grief is a natural human response to loss. So this really helped me because I realized it wasn't pathological. My response to losing our farm, there was nothing wrong with it. It wasn't that I needed to fix my emotions. It wasn't a sign of weakness. Grief is actually an essential part of our human experience, and it's deeply embedded in our history as a species. So it's actually really a healthy sign to have these intense feelings when we're losing something that's so important to us. It's appropriate, it's justified. And we actually are feeling grief because we love something and we're invested in something. So just that validation alone was really helpful for me in accepting that, of course, I'm going to feel this way. Of course, I'm going to have these intense feelings, these varied feelings. So who experiences climate stress and grief? There are a number of different organizations and institutes that have been doing research, and you can see that more and more, and this isn't even, there's even, surveys from 2024 that show even more extreme levels of climate stress and grief. Just at OSU this past August, we interviewed 50 farmers and found that all of them, 100%, are experiencing climate stress and grief. So it is a very common experience. And I think that's also just important because it is something, and we'll talk about this in a bit, it's something that we tend not to talk about. There's sort of a stigma around it because it's so overwhelming and it's such a downer. People don't want to talk about it, and what that leads to is kind of a sense of isolation. So an important question to think about is, how does climate stress and grief, how do they differ from other types of grief? So for one thing, they're overwhelming. Most of the grief that people are familiar with, losing a loved one, losing an animal companion, they're really intense. It can be heartbreaking, but they are discrete. It's one loss at a time. Whereas climate grief is overwhelming. We've already lost so much. There's so much more to lose. People across the world are losing things all the time. And so there is this sort of sense of overwhelm. And often the response to that is kind of a numbing out, like just distract ourselves. You know, if you're a farmer, you put your nose to the grindstone, you keep working because what are you going to do? It's too much. If you let yourself start feeling the feelings, it's going to overwhelm you. Or that's what, that's what's easy to think. It's deeply complicated. We looked at that climate grief wheel. You all expressed a lot of different feelings. People tend to really vacillate between those four quadrants. And people talk a lot about the guilt they feel about making decisions. Are you going to use a lot of carbon? Are you going to fly across the world for that vacation you've been saving up for 10 years? Are you going to go and visit your grandmother across the country and fly? So there's kind of this constant sense of like making decisions, and none of them feel necessarily that great. And then finally, climate grief is considered to be a disenfranchised grief. So there are no currently, and in the mainstream culture, there are no like validated ways of grieving. So for example, if your spouse dies or your parent dies, you will typically have a memorial or a funeral. You might get some bereavement time from work. You may have friends that bring you meals or write you cards. But when your creek dries up or you lose, part of your land to a forest, all your trees burn down in a catastrophic wildfire, there's no culturally validated ways of grieving right now as a community. And so we don't have that yet in place. So this is a new model about climate grief from the Canadian Climate Institute. And there's basically, they talk about there being four major types of grief. There's that slow onset change, like loss of ice or habitat or species. I personally experience that as kind of dread, like just like, oh, I know bad things are happening. I don't really want to think about it. Then there are acute disasters. And so our friends down in North Carolina right now have just gone through that, and other parts, and now Florida as well. And that's often associated with like a major weather related event. And we often think about PTSD. You get into that fight or flight, that there's a lot of stress in your body when that happens. And then vicarious grief, when we're witnessing suffering from faraway places. So when you see that footage, you realize all these families have just been displaced, we can pick a million examples. And then I talked about a little bit that anticipatory grief. So knowing what may happen in the future and letting our minds go to really dark places. There are other types of grief there. You can read the comforts of conveniences, just wanting things to be normal, wanting to have a political system you trust, wanting to be able to talk to all your family members about this topic without having to be afraid that it's going to be fraught. So just this is a lot of different types of loss here. And this sounds pretty obvious, but it really is going to manifest differently for everyone. So this slide illustrates some of the ways that negative stress can manifest in your body, mind, and emotional world and behaviors. It's really important to remember that no one processes stress in the same way. So we might cope differently depending on what the stress is, what else is going on in our lives, what type of coping strategies were modeled when we were growing up. And this may also be impacted by other types of stress, economic hardship, discrimination based on our race or our religion. And so then we have this added stress of climate change that can come to feel very overwhelming. I like this slide. This is, on the left, it's sort of like this kind of familiar model of the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with, I think in the 70s or 60s. And then what the actual experience is, just all over the place. You're toggling between all these different emotions all the time. Not a linear process. So why is climate grief and stress more complicated for farmers? To me, it's kind of obvious. We're outside a lot of the time. Our livelihoods depend on our yields and what's happening in the fields. farmers were outside a lot more. So we're not, we're actively working with these life cycles of plants and animals. So much of the American population now spends their time in climate controlled environments and often looking at screens. And so there is a real disconnect between nature. I always like to talk about this idea of the agrarian imperative. Most people have not heard of it. It's a term that was coined in 2010 by Michael Rossman, who's a professor in the Midwest. And he describes it as this human instinct to acquire sufficient territory to produce food and shelter required by families and communities. And it compels farmers, this is what I really like, to work incredibly hard, to endure unusual pain and hardship, and to take uncommon risks. And often I can't see any of you, but when I talk about this with a group of farmers, their eyes kind of light up like, oh my gosh, that's me. And I see it with my husband. We'll have this like incredibly challenging growing year and all kinds of hurdles and obstacles. And yet, come wintertime, he's like looking at the seed catalogs and making the farm plan for the next year, and he's all excited. And when I learned about this term, I brought it up with him and I was like, do you relate? And he's like, oh, absolutely. I will farm until I die. I will grow food. For him, it's this imperative. And I think I noticed that with a lot of farmers, there's almost like this inexplicable drive to produce food beyond what sometimes seems reasonable, even facing incredible challenges that most other people would leave a profession if it was that fraught with hardship. So I find it's helpful to think about why farmers continue, even with even with climate change now on top of everything else. And then historically, the research shows us that farmers have been less likely to seek out mental health and emotional support than other parts of the population. So one of our first tasks was to really understand and to be able to explain, why is this important? Why is it important to actually address climate stress and grief? I told you a little bit about my experience. I needed support because we were needing to make some really difficult decisions, and I was just struggling to even think straight. But there's other information. So this is another graph that comes out of the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. And this is based on research that they've conducted and research from other places, but basically saying that if we're not processing our climate emotions in some way, this doesn't mean you have to be in a therapy support group, but that if you're not actually addressing them in some ways, there are a lot of pretty negative behaviors that can come out of it. And that really our mental health affects our ability to perform. So we're not going to be able to farm that well if we're not addressing mental health issues. So these are some of the potential behaviors and impacts of not talking about climate emotions. There's a professor out of Stanford named James Gross, and he's done extensive research on what happens when people suppress negative feelings. So what he found, he did this whole study and he had people actively suppress negative feelings. And what he found is that it impacts your short-term memory, your decision-making abilities, and you're actually less likely to come up with innovative ideas. There's also physical consequences, including cardiac stress, when you're actually suppressing difficult emotions. So it's pretty critical to pay attention to our mental health, which to me means protecting your rest, taking care of ourselves, making sure that we're seeking out professional support when we need it. That same researcher, Gross, also found that positive emotional states predict the generation of innovative ideas. So when we're in a good mood, we actually come up with better, more creative solutions, and we're able to keep performing. And we know from general resources, is like, we haven't done a lot of research on farmers yet, but we know generally with people, when they talk about their climate emotions, they're more resilient, they feel more connected with their community, and they're more likely to take action. So actually seeking out positive emotional states, so feeling better, will not only make you more resilient as an individual, but it makes you better able to function during stress and then take action. So you can imagine if you're having like a stressful season and you're just like working all the time and not really taking care of yourself, not talking about the stress with anyone, even your spouse or your best friend, And then suddenly, a wildfire hits, or that's what I always go to because I'm in Oregon. But whether it's a flood or a hurricane, whatever it is, you're already going to have been under so much chronic stress that when that acute situation happens, it's really hard to function. So that's partly why we need to be taking care of ourselves and looking at this mental health stewardship. So I remember this. Oh, I wanted to say that, yeah, so seeking out positive emotional states is important. I remember this bumper sticker really well from the 1990s. If you're not angry, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. So I think it's kind of a common belief, like if you're too happy, you're going to be complacent, you're not really living reality. Um, but actually, again, the research is proving otherwise. So when we're in a good mood, we're actually able to come up with better solutions, and we're able to keep performing. And so we can see that this is a graph from a professor of psychology at Georgetown University, Kay Kuslev. And he did some research between the relationship between happiness and climate concern and climate action. So you can see over here on the left, the bottom, the x-axis is happy categories, and then the y-axis is climate concern. So in this first one on the left, we're looking at people that are not too happy are going to be more concerned about the climate. And you can see, they're less concerned if they're happier. And that sort of makes sense. If you're worried, if you're ruminating a lot, then you may be more worried about the climate. But on the right, you can see that actually the happier people are, the more action they're taking. And he actually looked at projecting in the future, and happier people also tend to be more likely to take action in the future. So this is kind of like counterintuitive. And I was really impacted by a talk I went recently to on climate stress and grief, and that was more for climate activists. But the takeaway message was your mental health really matters for saving the planet, or just making a difference, or continuing to do the work that you want to do. So it doesn't actually work to sacrifice your well-being for the planet. So what helps? Again, we know from research that having a shared language, being able to name what we're experiencing, that's why the climate emotions wheel can be really happy or helpful, not happy, because we can feel like agitated or out of sorts, or we don't quite know what's wrong with us. And then actually being able to look and name the emotion in the specificity can be supportive. And then also just knowing that this is a cultural phenomenon. Like I said, nothing is wrong with you if you're experiencing any of these emotions. We're losing a lot right now, and we're suffering a lot of stress, really stressful situations. So validating that experience. Again, I've said it before, talking helps, whether this is just having a friend who will listen to you without trying to solve your problems or talk you out of your feelings. All of that is really important. And then building a sense of community and solidarity through group sharing can be really supportive. What I've seen out of the climate emotions research is that they're actually finding that it's can be better, rather than one-on-one therapy, to actually talk in groups, because it does help build that community, so that when you're having a challenging experience, you can fall back on that. And then cultivating these states of resilience. So this is kind of a new concept to me, and I think it's really interesting. So, if things continue the way they are for now, we are going to be in these continued greater states of distress and more frequent states. We're going to keep having these 100-year events. We're going to keep seeing record-breaking temperatures, and how that's going to impact our animals and our crops. And so as we have more and increasing numbers of these kind of states of distress, we need to be actively pursuing states of resilience, is what I call it, which I think of as just like states where you feel joy, where you feel connection, where you feel like a sense of harmony. And I don't think in the past we've necessarily like sought those out intentionally, but I think more and more we're seeing we can't avoid those states of distress. There's no way to. Especially if we're farmers, we know that, but that we actually need to be sort of making sure we're creating an equal, or a lot of positive experiences too, and that's going to actually take some work or some thought. This can be really hard for farmers. I mean, we're always busy. There's always more to do. As I mentioned before, farmers are less likely to seek out mental health support. My husband, Tom, is like the classic stoic farmer. He has no time for feelings. He only wants to go to a class if it's going to help him be more productive. He tends, like many farmers, towards that stoicism, and he wants practical solutions and tangible steps. Like, how can I make my farm more resilient? But again, I just want to return to my story, which is like we knew all the ways to make our farm more climate resilient, but when it came down to it, we actually needed some emotional support as well in order to make those choices. Um, I also think that it can be so for so many people, like when you talk about those resilient states or like what are people doing to like get the rest and the quiet time they need, so many people talk about going into nature. And so I find it ironic and interesting that, farmers are typically outside on the land interacting with plants and animals, but that can actually create stress because we're looking at all the things we need to do or we're looking at all the things that are going wrong. And so that's just sort of like an interesting paradox. So, what can farmers do? One of the things that's come up in a lot of our workshops is farmers want to be in nature that they're not actively managing, whether that's a wild land or it's literally walking across the road and sitting by the river for 15 minutes that is not on your property. It can also be regular brief activities. I have a farmer who went through one of my trainings and now he told me he has 4 barn cats, and every single day he goes out of his way to make sure he pets and he spends a little time with each of those 4 cats. And that again, that is connecting with animals can be a great way to regulate your nervous system and just experience like some time of connection. And then talking to other farmers. So actually, sharing that things are hard and why and what our feelings are. So, what I'm hoping, and maybe we could use the chat for this, although I'm not looking at the chat, because what we found that's really, really helpful for people is to actually name something that you've personally lost to climate change. And we normally would do this in a group when we're in person, but I think we could use the chat for this. So there's a couple things about this. This is not something global. I think part of what happens when we talk about climate change is we're thinking about like the polar bears, or we're thinking about the Great Barrier Reef, and it's far away and kind of abstract, and it's not actually like affecting us personally. Um, Even like knowing all these people are suffering in North Carolina, I didn't really feel it until I got on the phone with a friend who lives in Asheville and she told me her story. Then suddenly it was like much more concrete. But one of the ways we can start to feel some of these feelings, which again is like the helpful thing to do to feel them, process them, move on, is to start naming what we have lost. And so again, we do this in our groups. We ask people to be personal. So we hear things like, people losing, like not hearing insects on their farm at night anymore. Like there's a total decimation of the population of insects. One woman talked about how she used to go and hunt for crawdads with her father when she was a kid in Lake Washington, where their farm was near. And now there are no more crawdads in Lake Washington. So in that case, she's lost, like, not only are there no crawdads, but she no longer has that ritual with her dad. So that would be like a secondary loss. And people have talked about, places they would camp that are now burned. Again, we have a lot of wildfires in Oregon. Um, and so I can't, like I said, I can't access the chat right now, but if people want to share something specific, it's a nice way to actually, let yourself feel some of how is this affecting you personally. I know there are people that are like, I'm not affected at all by climate change. But if you dig a little deeper, maybe it is that nephew that you can't talk to anymore about politics because it's so fraught, or you go back to a place you went to as a kid and it's completely different. Someone talked about going to Glacier National Park, and the glaciers were completely different and had retracted, and how much that meant to him as just a childhood experience. So we'll continue. Hopefully people are writing in the chat. So again, I talked about sort of this like cultivating states of resilience to counteract all these states of distress that we find ourselves in and will continue to find ourselves in. And so we do some other work around resilience strategies. And I've done this with so many groups now, and it's been interesting to see how, like how they kind of fall out in different categories. And I like to talk about resilience as like, we're all resilient, right? Like you all manage to like at the lunch, well, for me, it's my lunch hour. You manage to log into Zoom, you're part of this organization, you're somehow still involved in farming. So you're resilient, right? You're not like lying in a fetal position in your room, which would also be okay and understandable, but you are clearly resilient to just be here. So we start with that like strengths-based approach, and then we consider this like a skill share. So we're actually going to share some resilient strategies. But I wanted to like just let you know what we've seen so far. So people talk about stress. So this is just things you could do in your daily life. I mentioned like petting the cats as an example. Self-care, connecting with self. This could be, I mean, this could be therapy. This could just be like taking the time to celebrate a win, even if it's a small win. It could be meditation. Anything just that's like help. Maybe you journal, and that's a way that you consider a way to like keep going and getting through some of these feelings. Connecting with others, that could include animals. Like I said, one person talked about having like the silliest golden retriever and just playing ball in the river with this dog. It just brought him so much joy. Um, Maybe having a happy hour with your neighbors, just short and sweet, but just that connection. Or taking a class and finding like-minded people. Connecting with nature, we talked about this already. Someone talked about after a big fire going out and hunting morels, because morels actually do better after a fire. So, or swimming in the river, sleeping outside and watching the sunrise, noticing the noises in the evening. Service, this could be, someone talked about feeding elderly neighbors, donating money or voting, planting a community garden. And then seeking out joy and fun. So this could be, you know, humor. People send around those funny videos just to feel that moment of like relaxation and joy, right? We need those moments. I used to just think that was all like so self-indulgent or Pollyanna. Again, like if you're not upset, you know, you're not paying attention. But actually, we need those little moments. Having a creative outlet. For some people, that's music or sewing or art. And then thinking about like, you know, limiting notifications on your phone or deciding like you're not going to doom scroll or whatever it is to just like reduce technology and keep that in check. So those are just some of the examples. It's always so fun to do this with a group and find out the variety of resilient strategies folks are using. So I thought we would do that. Again, we're going back to Slido. So I will give you a little bit longer if you haven't had a chance. So the prompt, what activity helps you find a state of resilience? And you can add as many as you want. So again, think of this as a skill share. So this is your offering to the group. What do you like to do to feel good? And it's fun to see this populated. So feel free to add, like I said, as many as you want. And maybe these are, oh, here we go. Hmm. Go fly a kite. I love it. Yeah. Wow, lots of animals. Crafting. I want to hear more specific about the crafting. Like, will the crafter say what crafts you do? Playing. I love it. Walking the farm. I'm glad that's resilient. Hang out with the family, loving on the animals, arts and crafts, weeding in my garden, then just walking around to look at what's growing, not just what I lost. I love that. Sewing. Commiserate with other farmers. Okay, so you all are doing this. It's so great. It's so important. Watch my daughter interact with nature. Knowing it can get better, seeing happy people encourage me, focus on what can be, reach out to others. I'm going to like cry. This is beautiful. Reach out to others, sitting outside after dark, pottery, playing or hanging out with my son, felting wool dryer balls. Cool. knitting, high control, clear, visible progress. Awesome. Leaning in, learning more. This webinar is an example. And taking action, action where I can. Awesome. Listen to my son play music. Oh, it's beautiful. I just want to share the action where I can. My husband has really gotten into like the Stoic philosophy lately, which is this idea of like really focusing on what you can control and not worrying about the rest. Because we can tend to like worry about so much that's out of our control. And then all of that energy and all of those creative thoughts are like getting spent on something that actually we can't control. So, so like starting to discern that is really cool. And I really love that you wrote that, taking action, action where I can. That's really, really beautiful. We've got someone else typing. We'll just give this another minute or so. So feel free to add more. This is so beautiful. I love reading these and seeing the themes. Okay, good. We got 2 people in there. Dreaming about how to steward and restorative ways. Nice. Yeah, so I think it's important to say like, these resilience strategies can be about practical solutions. We've had people talk about putting in pollinator gardens, cooking, nourishing myself with local ingredients from my farming pals. That's awesome. Learning ways to become more resilient farming. Awesome. Time farm. I don't know if I'm not sure what that means, but great. Well, I'll leave this open if you want to add more. We're collecting all this data, and it's obviously all anonymous. And then this is my last slide, and then we can take some questions or some comments if people have them. But we built this website in the last couple months. I didn't really talk about it, but it is really important to talk about, suicide and suicide prevention when feelings get really intense. This project is really more focused on kind of chronic and ongoing stress and grief and not looking at that kind of suicidal ideation. But there are some great trainings, really short trainings on how to support other farmers. In Oregon, we have the agri-stress hotline, and there are a couple of good hotlines that are available specifically to farmer populations. We do have, if you go to our website, we've got a page of resources with some of those hotlines and just other information. But feel free to check out the website. Like I said, there's lots of other great resources, and stay in touch. We're hoping to broaden this out to other parts of the country. And if you're interested in staying involved or how to bring it to your community, we'll have lots of great resources and curriculum to share out. And I think that's really it for my presentation. So I'm happy to take some questions or.
Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to go ahead and put their questions in the Q&A, which again is the 2 speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and launch our end of webinar poll. And if you wouldn't mind answering those, it really does help us with our reporting and making sure that we can get funded and keep everything free so that nobody has to pay for any of our services. Anyway, okay, I'm not seeing any questions come up. Oh, I lost my poll. Oh, here we go. So I'm not seeing any questions. I don't know if you want to add anything else in. Maud, it sounds like I have one question if nobody else is gonna put anything in there.
Yeah, and I was thinking I could read some of these losses. I think could be interesting.
In the chat, yeah, there were lots of really great comments in there. But I did have a question about the so you're interested in the last slide you had, the website that you shared with Oregon State with the grief and loss. Is that a program that is specific to Oregon, or is that a cooperative extension? service that
At
you
this
can
point,
find.
it's just housed at Oregon State University, but it's certainly there's nothing there's no information that would not be applicable to any other farmer around. So yeah. And I mean, I think it's important to remember there's no easy answer to any of this. I mean, it's not a
Mhm.
problem to be solved. And I think that's what can be tricky, especially with so many of the farmers I work with. It's like they have a problem and they want to figure out how to solve it. You know, farmers are problem solvers and they want practical information. And so it is a little hard to roll this out and that's why we do the slides on like this, you know, taking care of your mental health is actually really important. And it is research based. You know, we're scientific people too, even though we're talking about mushy things. But yeah, so taking charge of your mental health, taking that really seriously. And then also, and then recognizing that, yes, really the research is bearing out, talking about these feelings is important. And it doesn't have to be in a, you know, discussion group. Sometimes that can be easier because then you show up and it's a place where you know it's okay to talk about that because it can be hard. Like I said, it can be really
Mhm.
hard, a hard topic to bring up with people because I mean, who wants to bring that up at a potluck or like a barbecue? No one wants to talk about, you know, what all, the climate. It's really difficult. And you know, so it's nice for some people to be able to go to a place where they know it's okay to talk about and they won't be judged and it's actually encouraged and welcomed. But it is important to be addressing these. If we don't process these feelings, they are going to probably leak out in some way or we'll burn out because we're not attending to that. But again, it's hard to convince farmers that have a mental model of like, things get hard, you work harder. You know, you put your nose down and you get through the season and you don't complain or you complain, but you know. So it's I really encourage your feedback. This is a 1 year old project. We've gotten
Oh, wow.
incredible feedback before. It's a type of thing where people don't know they need it. They don't even know it has a name. And then once they get there, they're like, oh my gosh, I need this. But it's
Mhm.
hard to figure out how to get in. So our strategy has been to pair it with other types of climate resilience programs. So come learn about building your soil health. We're going to talk a little bit about emotions while you're here. So we kind of sneak it in. Oh, there's a message. I'm curious. Um, we
So we
need to
do have
feel it
some,
to heal it. Yes, Diane. Really enjoyed all the was provided. Okay. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
do have some questions, Maud.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Great. Please. We got 10 minutes.
Uh, Christina asks, will you share the definition of agrarian imperative again, please?
Yes, I will. I've got it typed here. See if I can find it. One second. So it's the he described Michael Rossman describes it as a basic human instinct to acquire sufficient territory to produce the food and shelter required by families. And it compels farmers to work incredibly hard to endure unusual pain and hardship and to take uncommon risks. And I think you can Google that and find it too. But yeah, his work is really interesting. I hope you found that helpful. Everyone I talk to is like, "Oh my God, that's what I have. That's what ails me."
Well, so I raise turkeys amongst other things. And so right now that whole idea of just sort of like just keep your head down, just keep working, and you know, you don't take days off. It just keeps going and keeps going. Like this morning, I because I work, we were supposed to have yesterday off, so I worked yesterday so that I could process turkeys this morning. So it's just like so that I could be finished in time to do this
Right,
webinar, and then
right,
it's just like
right.
it's a hard time of year.
It
And
is,
so
yeah.
yeah, and you
And it
just
is, I
it's
mean, that is partly why, you know, I put in that slide about farmers. Like it can be a really short experience. Like I thought that was so lovely, the farmer that was like, I just pet my cats. Like, you know, maybe it takes him 5 or 10 minutes a day, but it really, he's like, oh, it's so great. I get to touch my animals. I'm taking that just that few minutes. And I know it's a discipline
mhm,
sometimes, but that cumulative effect of just taking those moments for connection and joy
yeah.
really add up. And it's so important because we can't keep going if our mental health is and
Well, I
this
think
isn't about yeah.
this would have been really helpful during COVID because there was a lot of anxiety and stress during COVID, especially for farmers, just because a lot of us ended up being so much busier than we had been before. And so I just remember saying, I just want to breathe. I can't breathe. I need to breathe
Mhm.
because it was
Yeah,
just so stressful. There was just so much
right.
going on all the time. But
Yeah.
we do have some other
Great.
questions.
There was one thing in the chat that felt really relevant that I just wanted to bring, if that's okay, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Um,
love it.
I like this comment. Somebody, Madeline Rosenberg said, every time we plan for quote unquote rest, there's another emergency. Greater stress plus zero rest plus uncertainty equals burnout. But there's
Yes.
no one to work our job, so we have to push through the overwhelm. And I think that that's just so
That's it.
relatable of the feeling of not being able to even take 5 minutes to do something like this. But you're
Yeah.
saying that even 5 minutes
Yeah.
is helpful.
Yeah. Or if there's a way, I don't know. I mean, again, like, let's co-create this. If you have ideas, tell me. I know it's easier said than done. And I think it's different for everybody, right? Like for some people, being with other people is really supportive. So are there some of those activities where you could do it, you could be doing, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's an easy answer or, but yeah, like sometimes it literally is walking across the road to a different property or, I loved what someone said, walking around your farm, listening to sounds at night. Like it can just be those little things. I think it's also like trying to notice when they happen. I know we don't have a lot of time, but there is a lot of work around gratitude, which again, like I have like a knee jerk blah, like gratitude is about sugarcoating and just like, I don't want to hear about gratitude. But the truth is like, gratitude, what I learned is it's totally an inside job. So in any moment, you could like have the worst natural disaster happening, you can actually find gratitude. So it's literally like an internal pivot that can change everything. So, and that is like a practice that people really, you hear about these
Right.
gratitude practice. Again, I'm like, blah. But the truth is like it can really change your internal mindset. And then when you start looking for gratitude in your life, you actually change your brain chemistry because you're looking for things to be grateful for. So you're seeking that. And as a species, we survive by looking at the worst things. That's how we survive. Is like we have the negative bias because we're trying to survive. So we're like looking for the poisonous plant, we're looking for the wildebeest on the horizon. So our brains naturally gravitate to all that's wrong. And so that gratitude is like, oh, what is going well? So, the Madeline, like, I don't, again, like, this isn't about sugarcoating. It's about like kind of reframing or just like deciding like I can pivot. Because again, that stoic thing, all we can control is ourselves, right? And so what, like, I don't know. And again, like I'm not sure if what I'm saying makes sense or if I'm just, but
It definitely does. It's my sister-in-law lives in Asheville, and so with everything that's just happened recently, that's one of the things that she was saying was just she loved how the whole community came together and they supported one another, and just how important that
exactly,
was. So it's not sugarcoating; it's
exactly,
just seeing sort of the silver
totally.
lining
Yes.
in
My
it.
friend in
I mean,
Nashville said the same thing. She said how sweet it was. They were all eating dinner
yeah,
together because they had to eat their perishable food. So they would make, the stone
exactly.
soup with the community. Same thing. I mean, it's devastating. And then there are these like moments of, because it really, I mean, I think it ends up being, it's connection. I think all we really want is connection, whether that's
Right.
nature, our pets, or like our loved ones, depending on
We
your,
have a couple more
okay.
comments and questions. Sylvia says, you don't feel like planting anymore. This disaster is so bad. Talking about feeling not gone, helping doing things is to make things better. And she says we all should get paid $50,000. I'm with you, Sylvia. I think I should get
Definitely.
fifty thousand dollars
I second that.
for motivation for farmers. When you're paying only for your seeds and expenses and there's no profits. And sounds like Sylvia's had a rough time of it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
And Diane asks, what do you know about the suicide rate numbers of farmers in the US? Don't know
Yeah,
if you
I
know.
know they've been going up steadily since I think 2015. And I don't have that right in front of me, but I have heard that statistic. It was really bad in the 80s. And in a sense, like some people are like, oh, you should go back to the 80s and see what they were doing now, because of the financial with, the Secretary Butts who said get big or get out, all those, so much stress for farmers in the 80s. And that, so the suicide rates were really high then. And I believe it's 2015. It's been a steady increase since then, but I don't know beyond that. So, but
We did
maybe it's
a
different.
fact did a webinar. It was bouncing back from catastrophic events. Our friends at NCAP, that's the National
Yeah.
Center for
Yep.
appropriate and trainable, one of those
Technology,
technologies. I don't know, it's the worst name ever.
Mhm.
But and it was a really, I think everybody in the audience was crying by the end of it, because one of the presenters shared that her sister had just recently committed suicide because of a drought that they had had. And I can't remember, I think she's from Arkansas. At that time, this has been like 3 or 4 years ago, and I will send the link out to that webinar when I send
Great.
the
Well,
email.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to, I mean, that's a good reminder that, you know, part of talking about your feelings and encouraging this type of processing is like, yeah, it's for you. And then it's also for other people in your community. Like your friends, that woman's sister, it's like, we don't know who needs to talk, and talking yourself gives people permission to be more honest and maybe to get help too, because that is just, it's so tragic to lose farmers. I mean, to lose
Yeah.
anyone to suicide, but.
Yeah. And I'm going to do one more question. And
Okay.
while I do that, I'm actually going to share my screen with what we've got coming up. But let me ask this question first. So Laura asks, what do you say to people who tell you that global climate change is a hoax? And so I think that's a great question. But then also
Yeah.
Milo asks a question about uh, the medicalization, pathologicalization, those are mouthfuls, of the mental health consequence of environmental losses. You mentioned that difficult feelings are natural, and I'd love to hear more. Helping people seems important, as does addressing root causes. Also, have you come across the word solastalgia?
Yes.
Milo, you've come up with a lot of words.
Yeah.
It's hard to get your mouth around, your tongue around. If so, so would you like to talk about that? I don't know if you want to address Laura's question about climate change.
I mean, yeah, I will say something. I mean, obviously, this is a big trend. This is feelings, and it could be any stress. I mean, right now, what we're really all looking at is, I mean, most people are looking at some form of climate stress, whether it's empathic or it's happening on your farm. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. We never talk about like why climate change, like like what, like the cause or anything. But we are science-based, and what we see in the scientific community is this is definitely happening. And so I just go on that. And then if people are, you know, if people are reactive to the term climate change, we can talk about extreme weather events. I mean, certainly in Oregon, you can talk about drought, and there's like, you cannot doubt that there's a drought in Oregon. This is really more about feelings. It's not necessarily trying to convince anyone of anything. So I haven't had much pushback, to be honest. And then Milo, your question, there was a few parts to, I do know that term. Definitely, there's a lot of terms. There's like eco-anxiety. There's a lot of different terms, and I that one is one I'm familiar with. And then your other question about, was it the pathologicalization?
Any remarks about medicalization slash pathologization,
Yeah, making it pathological.
of
Yeah.
the mental health consequences of environmental losses? You mentioned that difficult feelings are natural. I'd love to hear more. Helping people seems important, as does addressing root causes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's really, I everything I've heard is like, this is normal. Like, and it's actually, like I said, it's a healthy sign. It's a sign that you care and you are invested. So there's definitely nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling it. There are a lot of, I don't know that I see it being medicalized, so I'm not sure what you're talking about there, but I guess my only other comment would be, and I do bring this up sometimes, is that, you know, in the culture that many of us live in, which is like this, I don't know who's on this call, but Oregon is very white. Most of the farmers I work with are white, and we haven't dealt with like a collective trauma, or you could argue that we have in different ways, but we haven't dealt with a genocide on this continent. We haven't dealt with like enslavement of hundreds of thousands of our people. So my point is, like, this type of collective trauma, I think, is new for a lot of people, but it's certainly not new. Like, if you think about most indigenous people, they are living in the post-apocalypse. So they have been through this type of collective trauma before, but it's new for a lot of us. And so I think like there are silver linings. Like, I think we could become like way more empathic. We could like actually bring our full selves, our full emotions to everything that we do. So there's like possibilities for this to like make us better as a species. But Yeah, anyway, thanks, Diane. I hope that was articulate enough. I just wanted to comment on that because I think it is, you know, there's a solidarity. And again, that's why like we need to talk about it because we're all experiencing it in almost all of us are experiencing it in one way or another, or we're repressing it, which again is like totally understandable. It's a lot. It's really overwhelming. So I honor you all for wherever you're at with this. And I do encourage people to talk about it if you can and to check out our website if that's helpful.
Thank you, Maud. That was a really wonderful presentation, and I think very timely for those of us in North Carolina, especially in
Yeah.
Florida and Tennessee. And I do have a couple of housekeeping things to do before we sign off, but I'm going to stop the recording.